Hey, aloha, everybody, and welcome to Coffee with Coach. It's not really Coffee with Coach today. It's Pellegrino with Coach because I got up early and went surfing, and I did my coffee this morning about 4:30. So it's all good. A little San Pellegrino is good for the soul. How you doing, Michael?
San Pellegrino with Coach. I like it. I like it. I'm doing good. Fred's already in saying evening, Mahalo tribe. It's Jeff. It's just it's for people listening to this podcast or watching this live now. Jeff is 11 hours behind the UK, Ireland, 12 hours behind Central Europe. You're basically living on a different planet, man. Come on, like this is like
I am
scary
living on
stuff.
I am living on a different planet, but right now I'm living on my lanai, and it's kind of a we've had it's been about 6 days since we've really seen the sun much around here. So it's been really rainy. It's the spring here, so I guess that's what you get. But today, when I was surfing, I watched the big cruise ship come into Hilo Bay, and I thought to myself, man, them poor people paid all that money to come to Hawaii, and they've had rain for probably the last 4 days. So hey, you take your chances, I guess. Speaking of taking your chances, my man, huh? We are getting close to the draft. And I mean so close you can smell it.
2 weeks to go. Can you believe? Apparently, and I don't know if you can confirm this. Are you in Vegas? Are you gonna confirm this now live in the show, or is this like a TBC sort of thing?
Right.
Or
Am I in Vegas right now?
no? Like, will you be in Vegas in 2 weeks? Is this the plan, or can you confirm it, or is it still TBC?
Is it, let me ask you a question. Is it a big event?
It's Vegas, Jeff. It's a big event. It's a big. That's a big few days, like Vegas, and it's only what
Well,
like 5 hours in the flight for you.
yeah, no, it's about 7. But you
Oh,
know what? If it's a big event, then Coffee with Coach got to be there. So
oh.
I would anticipate that you will see us at the draft.
I am going to put a live disclaimer in and say that I am not going to be in Vegas. However, I know Oliver is going to come on in about 10 minutes and go through, I think, linebackers tonight, Jeff. And I'm excited because this is a really stacked defensive draft. But one thing I wanted to talk to you about before we started was I know you've probably seen it over the weekend. Awful news. Dwayne Haskins dead at 24 years of age. This is a guy that was picking up his career again, really. And I'm being as positive as I can be. He was doing really, really well in Pittsburgh. Was doing very well with the ownership. They were very fond of him. It's just awful, Jeff, isn't it? Like I'm presuming you got to watch a lot of his tape whenever he was in college, and obviously when he came into the NFL as well.
Yeah, it's just really a sad, sad thing. Anytime a young life is taken like that, and the details of it are all kind of sketchy. But apparently, he was hit by a car, you know, trying to cross the highway. It just doesn't matter how it happened. The bottom line is, here's the guy that you know had a great career at Ohio State, drafted number one by his hometown team, and then struggled under the expectation and the weight of all of that. Was released, found a home in Pittsburgh, and according to everybody, I agree, Mike. Everything I've heard was that uh, the ownership liked him, people in the team liked him. Uh, you know, Mike was a big fan of his, and so when you sort it all out, it's just like, why? It's one of those ones we can never answer. But I tell you what, it does do is it reaffirms how precious life is, and how you know how every day is one you gotta be thankful for, and you gotta say your blessings. And you know I just really really feel for his family and everybody, all of his friends.
I completely agree, Jeff, and I can't really say much more than what you said there. I think you said it that well. Just obviously, rest in peace to Dwayne and his family. It's going through an awful time, and it's hard to believe, and it's I guess football comes secondary when it comes to shocking news at the weekend. I'm trying to think, has there been anything else that's really picked up? There hasn't been a lot over the last couple of days, Jeff. Obviously, talk about the draft. Today, the Seahawks picked up the fifth-year option on Melvin Gordon. It's not Melvin Gordon. Sorry, Noah Fant, who was traded in the Russell Wilson trade. There hasn't been any, massive, massive pieces of news over the last couple of days. But has there been anything that really sort of shots out to you, if we're even talking about it now?
Well, I think the thing that I keep watching really close is there's a number of veteran free agents that are still out there. And I think they may be out there till after the draft as teams kind of look and see what they do draft wise. And then, it's as we get towards the draft, I looked at the first round, and Michael, I'm going to tell you, about half the teams in the first round have a need for an edge player. And that just shows you how much emphasis is put on now getting to the quarterback. As this game
Hmm.
has evolved, edge rushers are worth their weight in gold. They become, the Cadillacs on defense. It used to be the middle linebacker. Then it was the corners. Then it was the safety. Now it's your edge. You got to have great edge players, and you can't just have one. You have to have two. And so this, as you said, is a defensively stacked draft. And as you look at teams, say for example the Texans, who really need a lot of things, but an edge is one of the things that they need badly. They're going to have the third pick in the draft, and they're going to be in a position to get a really really good football player. Now, as you look at those guys, and we'll talk about those guys a little bit later, but Aiden Hutchinson seems to be, you know, the guy that everybody says is the alpha male of that edge class. But Kalen Thibodeau from Oregon has got tremendous skills. There's a number of them, and the thing that concerns me about Hutchinson a little bit, when I watched him in the Georgia game against really good competition, he didn't play a great game. And um, when you look at tape, and I think this is important that fans understand this, as you're looking at tape, you want to see that guy against the best possible competition. And how does he play in big games? I mean, it's one thing to beat up on lesser schools, but when you got to play in a playoff atmosphere, which is the college football national championship playoff, Michigan got pasted by Georgia. You want to make those your signature moments. And I didn't think he did against Georgia. Now there's plenty of other good tape on him, but that's one that I think I would pump the brakes a little bit on that one.
We're going to bring Ollie on in a couple of minutes. He is here backstage. But just firstly, we asked people for questions, Jeff, earlier on when you were lying in bed 11 hours behind us, chilling out before you went surfing. Sean Freeman, who's in the UK, says, great coverage, Jeff, on Sky, and thanking you for that there. He also says, which team really needs to box clever and pick well in this draft? I think, you've talked about Houston there, but there are multiple teams that need to take advantage of where they are now because they may not be that high up again for a long time.
Yeah, I think that a couple of them come to mind with me. Both those New York teams I think need to do real well, and they are in position to do real well. Two first round draft choices. I'm really interested to see what the Saints do because they had pushed a first rounder into the next year, and when they gave it to Philadelphia, and then they got themselves an opportunity to get two real good players in the first round, which they need because of their salary cap situation. Or do they package those two and go up to get a guy that they really, really want? You know, everybody's going to talk quarterback, Mike, and and we always should because it's the most valued position on the field now. But this is a very weak quarterback draft, and I saw a comment that was made by one general manager about a player he had taken, and he said, well, it's the quarterback position, so we're always investing in that position. But I don't know if that's a good strategy because when you take a first round quarterback and he doesn't, he can't play, and this is a guy that was taken 2 years ago, and his comment was, we think he's a good player. This preseason's really important for him. If you've had that guy in your building for 2 years and you don't know if he's your franchise quarterback, then you got some issues. And I just really was shocked by that statement. You a first rounder, and this is a team now, Michael. This is a team that's been on the cusp of going to a Super Bowl. What would a first round great player, an impact guy, have been worth to that football team? And that's where I think teams have got to get out of this mindset that you take a quarterback in the first round. You take a quarterback in the first round if he's got first round ability.
And that really is the March, April, May hype train, isn't it? Teams can almost get carried away with certain things. Before we bring Ollie on, I'm going to bring him on 2 seconds. SA37 in Sussex says, who are your mid-round diamonds in this draft? I'm going to speculate and say David Ajabo falls to the 50s and 60s. I'm just going to say it just for the crack. Who knows? Obviously, that injury, and I think March the 18th, his pro day was. It's awful what happened to him. I'm going to say him, and I hope my team picks him up. Could you see him being available in the 60s, or do you think teams might look past injuries, Jeff? Or is there anybody else, just before we get Ollie on, that stands out to you?
Well, you think about like teams that have 2 first rounders, right? It depends on where you're at and how you valued him. So, for example, Simmons a couple years ago, the defensive lineman out of Mississippi State, that the Titans took and knew that they weren't going to have him for a whole year because of a knee, but they felt like it was worth basically redshirting him, which is in college you do that if a kid gets hurt, he gets an extra year of eligibility, so he sits for a year. In the pros, people are starting to do that now on injury situations. If you feel like that player is so good, if he was healthy, you would have taken him in that spot. And he's got an injury and an Achilles. It's amazing what they're doing with, post-op Achilles, situations now. It used to be a career threatening injury, but now there's so many of them. These guys have really got excellent techniques to repair it. You may just take him with a second first round pick so that you've got him, right? So again, I think there's going to be a lot of jostling. I think that what you're going to see, Michael, is in the mid rounds, there are going to be some really, really good players still on the board. There's some good tight ends. I mean, really good tight ends. If you're looking for a tight end, I think, we talked about this defensive loaded draft. There's better defensive back depth than I've ever seen. And so I think it's going to be a situation where teams may trade down knowing that there's not a great separation between a second rounder and maybe a late third and a fourth, right? So, that's the old Patriot strategy, which is to get more picks, because the more picks you have, the better your chances of hitting.
Absolutely, sir. 2 weeks away from the People's Draft. More on that next week and how people can get involved. I see in your face, you're a happy man. Talking about draft, talking about analysts. We've got Oliver Hodgkinson coming on here now from Pro Football Network. Check out Pro Football Network's website. You got a mock draft simulator. Oliver's loving these daily drafts or mock drafts. I wish I was as detailed and as analytical about the draft as Oliver is. Here he is. I'm going to bring him on here now. Oliver, I haven't fixed the bottom of the screen. People on the podcast are listening. What? Are you getting your sleep in? 2 weeks away. Did you watch any spring games of the weekend?
I did actually. We managed to get the Clemson spring game on. Our guy Eric McLean was doing the commentary live from Clemson, so we watched a bit of Clemson. There's a quarterback controversy brewing in Clemson, so that's something to watch out for. I'm not going to even attempt to try and pronounce DJ Uungalele's surname correctly. I think I might have got there then, but these are
outstanding work on a Samoan name. That is.
Thank you very much.
You are such an international man of mystery.
I have to go offline here and get some pictures, so I'll let you boys go on ahead and get your top 5. I gotta go Google some pictures. It's been a long day, boys.
Hey, Ollie, I gotta echo what Mike said. You're doing a great job. And I'm telling you, fans, you gotta check out Ollie's work, because he is really, really on top of it in this draft. We're going to talk about the linebackers today, but I'm a little more concerned about you. Are you getting any sleep at all?
Not a great deal. Not a great deal. Hey, look, it's the busiest time of the year. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Sleeps for May, June. Though we've got a son due in June, so I'm not quite sure how much sleep is going to come in June either. But who needs sleep, right?
Well, I'm gonna tell you something. You don't, because there's no way you could be doing all that work, watching all those spring games, seeing all those pro days, all that stuff, and getting much sleep. So I appreciate you though, because you're giving us great insights. Now we're talking about linebackers today, and it's really an interesting group. And you and I are gonna have a little conversation about one of the guys that you got up there ranked real high. And I'm not saying that he doesn't belong, but it was, you know, this is where I think you got to pay attention to what Ali brings you, because his process is beyond what you're going to see in most of the guys that are trying to evaluate the draft, right? Because there's a lot of guys that just parrot out what other people say. And if Daniel Jeremiah says it, then this guy's going to say it, or Mel Kiper or whoever. Ali is not afraid to look at the tape and make his calls, because there's a couple guys that each week when we do this, I go, woo, Ali, I like it, man. Give me your reason. But let's get going. Let's talk linebackers.
Let's talk linebackers. We're going 5-1. Let's start. Let's go 5-1, and we'll start with Christian Harris, linebacker out of Alabama, who is my 5th ranked linebacker in this class. Christian Harris is a real interesting study, and a real interesting story as well. He came into the season with the guys who were the top 2 guys that we're going to discuss a little bit later on, but he came in there as this consensus first round pick, consensus one of the top 3 linebackers in the class, and he kind of disappeared for large swathes of the season. Now, if you look at the statistics that Christian Harris put up this year, they're pretty good. They don't speak to what we saw on the tape. 11.5 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles for Christian Harris. A lot of that production came in the final game of the season, the college football national championship game against Georgia. Christian Harris was a ghost pretty much for the large part of Alabama's season, but shone on the biggest stage, the national championship, where he was, despite defeat, albeit in defeat, he put in a fantastic performance that showcased what he does bring to the football field. You obviously then call into question the consistency, but let's talk about what he does well before we go into that. Fast, physical, downhill threat is probably the best way to summarize Christian Harris. He's showcased some ability to be technically refined as well. He's got decent length, so he can shed blockers quite comfortably with that technical refinement, with the length. He's got the athletic profile to be a dangerous, disruptive, fast physical presence. For Christian Harris, there's 2 things that I think concern and therefore cause to drop. And I'll go ahead and say it. I know for a fact that Christian Harris is very high on a lot of NFL teams' draft boards. There's talk about him still being a first-round prospect for me, which I feel is rich. I think it's rich when you look about the large swathes of disappearing act that you saw out of Christian Harris this year, and also some of the limitations that he brings to the game. And you're going to hear the phrase 3-down linebacker quite a lot over the next 20 minutes. And because there's guys that we're going to talk about who are true 3-down linebackers in this class. For me, Christian Harris, he's phenomenal against the run. He's phenomenal at getting after the quarterback. That physicality, that speed, that explosion lends itself towards that element of his game. But for a kid who was a high school defensive back, there's a lot of question marks about his coverage ability. And when you're talking about being a 3-down linebacker, that's being able to stay on the field and play against the pass, not just as a blitzer, but in coverage as well. And I think sometimes Christian Harris kind of looks a little bit lost on the field when he's tasked with the coverage element of the linebacker position. And
let's hold up a second. 'Cause I'm really glad you're talking about this because we say 3-down linebacker, and that's really an antiquated term because in the old days you would get 12 personnel, 21 personnel, first and second down, and then you get 10 personnel, which is no tight ends, or you get 11, which is one tight end and 3 wide receivers on third down. And that's when you would go to nickel and one of the backers would come out. But the reality of the game today is there's teams play more nickel in a game, sometimes as much as 80% of the game in nickel, and very, very little 3-linebacker defense or 4-linebacker defense if you're a 3-4 team. So when we say 3-down player, that's kind of an antique term, and this is exactly what you're talking about, is why there are some questions about this guy, right? And that is coverage, because you now are thinking about him as a middle linebacker, as a Mike, because he's not going to go out and play in the slot, not based upon what's on tape.
Exactly. And this is, I think, for a lot of people with Christian Harris's athletic skill set and some of the stuff we've just talked about there in terms of his how he plays the game, his size as well. He's small for a traditional linebacker, and as you say, the game's changing and linebackers do get you don't see the 6'4", 260-pound linebackers anymore. You don't even. You rarely see a guy of sort of Luke Kuechly's stature in the game and frame as the game evolves and changes. But he is a little undersized, and a lot of people would look at him and say he might even end up playing as a 3-4 outside linebacker. That might be the best way to utilize his skill set at the NFL level. But there's not certainty about Christian Harris's projection to the NFL as far as what I see on tape for Christian Harris. So I do think the talk of him going in the back of the first round is a little bit rich for me.
All right. I like it. I agree with you.
Next man up. Excuse me. Next man up, Georgia linebacker Quay Walker. Now, look at that kid. Look at that graphic as well. Shout out Angela Zanaglio at Pro Football Network for that graphic. That is a stunner. Quay Walker is a guy that I've got too late. I must admit, you watch the Georgia defense and there is so many stars. There is so much going on. It's difficult to get your eyes on all these guys. We're going to talk about another Georgia linebacker a little bit later, but you look at all the prospects that they've got, and sometimes it's difficult to appreciate truly what each individual brings to the table. But for me, Quay Walker is a guy that is ascending in this draft class. Another guy who's been talked about as a potential late first round prospect. Again, a little bit rich for me, but I would certainly prefer to take him late in the first than I would Christian Harris. As part of that Georgia defense, he wasn't statistically a standout. He only had 5.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks, 3 pass breakups. But the way that Georgia operates that defense, they rotate players in and out quite a lot. They ask players to take on different roles within that defense at different times. So you don't see a massive statistical amount of production from the Georgia defensive front seven. But for me, completely the opposite to Christian Harris in that Quay Walker does bring a lot of coverage ability. Very intelligent linebacker who, particularly in zone coverage, he's got the understanding of zone concepts. He knows how to read the zone, where men are going to be coming in and out of his zone. He's always got his eye on the game, very intelligent. And this is a common factor that runs through Georgia defensive prospect. There's so much intelligence in that Georgia front seven. But so the intelligence in the coverage, the athletic ability in coverage, sideline to sideline, lateral agility, that helps Quay Walker be an interesting coverage linebacker. And again, explosive and physical coming downhill. which you want to see from your linebacker prospect. And it's one of the things that's so fascinating about the linebacker position is there's so much responsibility, so much goes on at the linebacker position that you need to be intelligent, you need to be athletic, and Quay Walker has both of those in his locker. A bigger linebacker as well, than Christian Harris, if we're talking comparatively. 6'3", nearly 6'4", 241 pounds. Good length, good size, good physicality, good coverage ability, good run stopping ability. Quay Walker is a prospect who is, I think, ascending up draft boards the closer that we get to the 2022 NFL draft.
I think if you're a team that plays a lot of Tampa too, that this guy can be a really, really good player as an inside backer for you, because to be able to run down the middle in Tampa too, if you get threatened by the tight end through the seam, he can do that. He also has great, I thought, as I watched him, great anticipation, and he drives on the ball. As soon as the ball's thrown, he is on it. I mean, and you think about it, Ollie, these guys like from Alabama and Georgia have a real advantage in that they've been fighting to get on the field since their freshman year, right? They have so much depth at those programs on defense that if you're not on point, you're not going to see the field. So these guys understand about competition, and they understand the sense of urgency that it takes to play at the next level.
Yeah, and this shows up in this class, because you look at the Georgia defense: Quay Walker, Channing Tindall, another guy that we're going to talk about in a little while, the near the top of the class. Then you look at the defensive line: Jordan Davis, Trayvon Walker, a guy who unfortunately is there's some uncertainty about his future in Adam Anderson, who was an exceptional player, but some off the field stuff that is currently being is or isn't being resolved. We're not going to get too deeply into that, but the talent is there, and you look at one of the top edge players in this class had to transfer away from Georgia to assert himself on this class in Florida State defensive end Jermaine Johnson. So that's the level of talent that we're talking about in this Georgia defense. You just guys after guys after guys. We've not even mentioned Devontae Wyatt as part of this conversation, the defensive tackle. There's just so much talent. Like you say, it's competition within your own locker room to get on the field. And it's competition in the SEC, who prides itself on being the premier college football conference. And so there's competition aspects all around. But for Quay Walker was a guy that he was predominantly bought in when they needed to make a play in coverage. He played to the strength of the passing game. So that going into the NFL, Quay Walker is a guy that is not going to be any sort of liability in the passing game. In fact, he's going to be an asset in the passing game for you.
What now? His size again? He's got the length to play against the tight end.
Yeah, so he's 6'3", 3/4, 241, wingspan of just under 80 inches, and 32 5/8 arms.
Yeah, so that you talk about all of those numbers. Say there's a guy that, again, if you're playing against a static tight end, now I wouldn't play him against Kelsey very much, or those kind of guys, Pitts. But again, if you're playing with a static tight end, he's the guy that can go line up on the tight end, beat him up, and carry him up the field, and play man to man and cover two man and all that stuff. So this guy's, I really like that kid.
Yeah, he's certainly ascending in this class, and I know there was several reports within the last couple of weeks that some teams see him as the best linebacker in this class, which is saying something. When we talk about the guys we're about to talk about shortly.
Gotcha. Now, who we got at 3?
One of my personal favorite players in the whole draft class is Wyoming linebacker Chad Muma. And for Cincinnati Bengals fans, they'll be familiar with Logan Wilson, who is a linebacker out of Wyoming. He's gone on and asserted himself in the NFL. I think Chad Muma is a better prospect coming out of Wyoming than Logan Wilson was coming out of Wyoming. I think he's going to be a better NFL player as well. good measurables, 6'2" and nearly 6'3", so 6'2", 3/4, 239 pounds, decent arm length, just under 32 inches. This is a kid who is the epitome of intelligence at the linebacker position. Super smart kid who's got a nose for the ball. He is also a team captain who has been an unbelievable leader for the Wyoming Cowboys football program. For his size, his athleticism is unreal. And when you combine the intelligence and the athleticism together, you get a special player in Chad Muma. You watch him. I've seen people say, "Oh, well, 239 pounds. He's not that." If you watch Chad Muma fly to the football, whether it be downhill, whether it be side to side, it's a joy to behold. Talking to one of my colleagues at Pro Football Network, and you put on the Boise State game, Wyoming versus Boise State, and Chad Muma's game against Boise State was something truly wonderful to behold. Great lateral athlete, great downhill athlete, physical, tackling form, not just the physicality that he brings, but the form that he brings to as a tackler as well. You don't see him often miss a tackle. You do often see him lay a guy in the dirt, and he's just. You're a quarterback, you're a running back. Watching Chad Muma come flying towards you is just, that's got to be a terrifying prospect. They say all 239 pounds of him coming flying downhill, but he's got that coverage ability as well. He's not quite as fluid as an athlete as Quay Walker, for example, in coverage, but he's still got the enough athleticism to get the job done in coverage. He's got the intelligence. When you've got that intelligence, that kind of almost gives you a step up, like a step advantage when you see the game at a different level to other people. It gives you that step up. I think Chad Muma is a guy who I think it wouldn't be out of place to see him taken at the top of the second round. I look at the teams that are in that position. I look at the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're always a team that are looking for linebacker help at 33. You look at the Detroit Lions. They're a team that need linebacker help at 34. New York Jets have got 2 picks early on in the second round. They need linebacker, someone to play alongside CJ Mosley. There is a lot of teams in that early second round range where I don't see Chad Muma falling past any of those teams.
My agent was at the Wyoming Pro Day, and I asked him about Muma. He had a lot of good things to say about this kid. He said he can really run, and apparently he went to Wyoming as a defensive back and then grew into being a linebacker. So, you look at today's linebackers and people say, well, 235 or 232 or whatever. There's a ton of those guys in the league right now because you have got to. I mean, you talk about shedding blocks. You're gonna shed blocks a few times in a game, most games, but you're gonna be in space a lot in every game now in the National Football League. What were his measurables in terms of the 40 and particularly do you have his short shuttle time?
I've not got them in front of me. What I have got is his relative athletic score, which is a metric composed by a good friend of mine, Kent Lee Platt, who takes relative scores from short or 3-cone, vert, broad, combined with size, weight, bench press results, and your speed time, so 40, 20, and 10-yard splits. And out of 10, Chad Muma scored a 9.77.
Because I heard this kid really shocked people at the combine with how well he moved.
Yeah, and I think the assumption is when you see a guy like Chad Muma, who is, he's not as light as some we've talked about Christian Harris being 226, a guy we're going to talk about in a second, 229. Some of the Brian Asamoah out of Oklahoma, who's a guy I like, 226. There are a lot of more slender-looking linebacker prospects than Chad Muma. So you see this kid out of cowboy country, big, white kid. You think he's not going to be athletic, and you just, he is. His I can't remember his 40 time off the top of my head, but I remember tweeting about it and going, look, this kid is the real deal from an athletic perspective.
And I'm gonna tell you something. It's not just what he does in his measurables. You look at his tape and look at his production at Wyoming. I mean, there are going to be some, and I would do it too, that are going to say, well, okay, Mountain West, right? You're not playing that elite back. You're not playing those elite players. But when you watch the tape, you just constantly see the kid. He's constantly making plays.
And I think as well, you talk about level of competition, and this, there is something that does get leveled at Group of 5 prospects. It's FCS prospects. But when you see him amongst the best of the best at an event like the Senior Bowl, like Chad Moomer rocked up at the Senior Bowl, and the linebacker drills there, he was out of this world. And you talk about flow into the football. I think Jim Nagy, the head of the Senior Bowl, he put a video on with Chad Moomer and a couple of the other linebackers in a drill. Flow into the football. Chad Moomer is such a natural mover, and that intelligence and the instincts that come with that, just they're evident. They're evident on the tape.
All right, now we got 2 guys left. I think they're both first rounders. Who got it 2?
So at 2, we've got Georgia linebacker Nakobe Dean, and you could probably, as you said, both first round prospects. I think you could almost put a cigarette paper between them in terms of separating where they could go in the class. I'd be happy to hear an argument for either of these two as the top-ranked linebacker. They're very close on my top 300 big board, next to each other at 15 and 16. But for me, Nakobe Dean is slightly smaller than Devin Lloyd, I think, and is noticeable on tape for me. So the measurables are what they are. Dean comes in at just under 6 foot at 5'11". He's 229 pounds. He's under 32-inch arms when you compare him to Devin Lloyd. So he's a noticeably smaller linebacker, and I think, rightly or wrongly, that'll be held against him where the NFL is concerned. And you see sometimes on tape that Nakobe Dean is that smaller backer. I did his summer scouting report, and looking back at his 2020 tape, he was consistently stonewalled by bigger, stronger offensive tackles. Now, he's developed this year to be a much more productive player as a pass rusher and as a threat getting into the backfield against the run game. He's worked with his natural advantages, which are speed, lateral agility, some technical refinement. So he's worked to overcome some of that, and it's showed up with some great production: 10.5 tackles for loss, 6 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, 72 total tackles. But that size issue is, for me, the sticking point between the two of them. But let's talk about what Nakobe Dean does well, and that is a hell of a lot. With the word intelligent, we've used about 500 times already, but it is such an important aspect of playing linebacker, as we've mentioned. There isn't a smarter kid on the football field and off the football field in this draft class for me than Nakobe Dean. He's a mechanical engineering major. Like, that is mind blowing what it takes to get a major in that particular arena. So he's a smart kid. You listen to him. I had the fortune to be in and around the national championship press conferences of National Championship Week, and Nakobe Dean, just such an eloquent and well-spoken young man in terms of putting his thoughts together. And we forget these are 19, 20, 21-year-old kids thrust into the national media, and he just handles that so well. And you see that on the football field as well. Natural leader, natural communicator, and that's so important when you're looking at particularly projection as a Mike linebacker in the NFL. How do you communicate? How do you understand and read the game and be able to communicate pre-snap shifts to your colleagues, to your teammates? Nakobe Dean does that so well. So that part of the game for Nakobe Dean, I don't think there is anyone better. And then as an athlete, fast. He's not ran at the NFL Combine or the Georgia Pro Day, which there was some rumors today, and take rumors at this time of year with a pinch of salt, that there's potentially some knee issue with Nakobe Dean, which is I've not seen reported ever before. So if it is true, it's something that's been very well hidden by the Georgia athletic department. So he's not ran, but you don't need to know how fast he runs a 40-yard dash to see how fast this kid plays on the football field. His ability to diagnose against the run and then just act upon those instincts, fly to the football, scrapes so well across the formation in the run game. Lateral agility is insane. His ability as a pass rusher, that lateral agility, that speed, just to navigate traffic, navigate offensive tackles. And this is what I mean. He's not the most physical of guy. He's not going to knock an offensive lineman to the ground and get over him. He's not going to get into a hand battle and win with violent punches to get an advantage that way. He's going to run around you. He's going to skip side to side past you. He's going to use that lateral agility to shoot into gaps. The athletic upsides are incredible. The football intelligence is incredible. The coverage ability, both in zone, with the ability to read and drop to correct depths in his zone, is phenomenal. As a man-to-man coverage linebacker, he's going to stick with whatever he has to in terms of running backs and bigger tight ends. The question mark is just the physicality, the size with Nakobe Dean as to his NFL projection.
Well, there have been some pretty good NFL linebackers are no bigger than Nakobe Dean. I'm going to say this. Kirby Smart at Georgia does a great job. His staff does a great job of coaching. And the defense that they run is intricate and is a lot of things, a lot of moving parts, a lot of changes, a lot of checks, a lot of those kinds of things. And if this is the guy that's running the show, which it was, that tells me you got a guy that's going to come in and the playbook's not going to be too big for him. The communication's not going to be too big for him. And, you mentioned 12 and a half tackles for loss. A lot of that is not on blitzes. It's just that he is so explosive. And when he sees the ball declare, I mean, he is like a bullet. And he's playing across the line of scrimmage. I mean, that 12 and a half TFLs and 6 sacks or whatever, you're talking about 18 plays on the other side of the line of scrimmage. I mean, that's phenomenal production across the line of scrimmage for a linebacker.
Yeah, and this is, like you say, it's the explosion. When we talked about Lewis Seen on when we were doing defensive back last week, it's the same story: diagnose and destroy. And that should be like Kirby Smart should have that like tattooed on his arm and up in big letters on the Georgia Bulldogs dressing room in Athens, just saying diagnose and destroy, because that's what some of the best players that Georgia have produced in this cycle do. They're so smart. They can diagnose every play so well. And like you say, that explosive athletic profile that they possess just allows them to live in the backfield.
All right, well, let's go back out west to Salt Lake City, Utah, for a Utah Ute you have listed as the number 1 linebacker.
Yes, sir. And we talk about production. Devin Lloyd is just, there are no words to describe Devin Lloyd's production, not just this season, but in his entire Utah career. But let's talk about some of the production. 111 tackles. Now, tackles can be a misleading figure because he might be making them 20, 30 yards down the field routinely as a result of not being up to scratch. But that's not the case where Devin Lloyd's concerned. Of those 111 tackles in 2021, 22 of those were tackles for loss. 7 sacks, 4 interceptions, 1 forced fumble. Now, we don't evaluate by numbers. We don't evaluate by statistics, but holy hell, those are some impressive numbers for Devin Lloyd. And that's not just this season. That is year-on-year top-level production. Now, not quite to those numbers, but year-on-year top-level production. Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. Probably should have been the Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year the previous year, as far as I'm concerned, but that's a contentious issue we're not going to get into. Devin Lloyd is a bigger man than Nakobe Dean. There's no questioning that. 6'2", 237 pounds, 33 inches, an incredible physical specimen to look at. in terms of the size, the stature, then he's an incredible specimen to watch play the game of football. Coming downhill, I wouldn't want to be the guy that has to stop Devin Lloyd coming downhill. For a guy of his size, he moves so well, like almost like he's teleported from one spot to the other on a football field. Like he's got some sort of teleportation device out there in Salt Lake City, and you cannot convince me otherwise. When he comes downhill, he hits you and he hits you hard. Coverage ability is great. Again, similar to a number of these top linebacker prospects, there's a common theme. He understands zone coverage. He understands where he needs to be. Where he needs to drop to in zone coverage. He's just an incredible processor. He's incredibly intelligent. He's got sideline to sideline range as well. We talked about Nakobe Dean. This is what sets these two apart, I think, for me, is the leadership that they bring to a football team. Devin Lloyd could have declared for the NFL draft last year, but he came back to Utah. Unfinished business, I think, were his exact words, something along those lines. He wanted to bring a Pac-12 championship to Utah, which if you said that to people before the start of the season, they'd have gone, come on, I'm not buying that. Devin Lloyd came back to Utah and helped deliver a Pac-12 championship to Utah. Nearly won a Rose Bowl, that incredible game against Ohio State on New Year's Day. Incredible leader, competitive toughness off the charts, physical presence, athletic ability, football intelligence. Devin Lloyd's your top-ranked linebacker in the 2022 NFL draft.
I don't think he'll last the midway through the first round.
So he is he's around the midpoint of my top 300 board. On our consensus big board at Pro Football Network, which combines 4 draft analysts, he's the 10th ranked overall player in the class. And you look at teams, the issue for me where the linebacker class is, you look at teams that need a linebacker. Philadelphia Eagles are a team that need a linebacker. They historically don't take linebackers in the first round. Haven't taken one since the 1970s or something like that, and almost as rare to take one in the second round. So the Philadelphia Eagles are a team that need a linebacker, but we feel pretty certain won't take one in the first round. So that takes one team off the table. I look at the New England Patriots. I look at the Green Bay Packers as teams that need linebackers. Detroit Lions, but I don't see them jumping at 2 for a linebacker. So then you back down to 32 and 34. That's my only not concern, but in terms of projected draft range for Nakobe Dean and for Devin Lloyd, is I struggle to see where they're going to fit in this class, where there's loads of top edge prospects, loads of top cornerback prospects, loads of top offensive tackle prospects, lots of teams that need those positions. And then obviously the mix of the quarterback situation, which we know, regardless of whether you've got a first round grade on any of these quarterbacks, we know 2, 3 quarterbacks are going to go in the first round as well. So it's finding landing spots for these linebackers. But someone's going to get a steal potentially with Devin Lloyd or Nakobe Dean. And Chad Muma.
That really brings up a talking point, because you're talking about an elite player, right? And I mean, everything you talked about is what says first round, early first round, all over him, right? And there are teams with multiple first round draft picks and multiple needs. And I cannot believe that the Giants, the Jets,
Well, the Giants is a great. So the Giants I think, is a potential. If we were looking at an early spot for someone like Devin Lloyd, the Giants is a great shout, because they have, like you say, they've got multiple needs. You feel like offensive tackle is going to be one of those at 5 or 7. So 7 potentially could be the New York Giants and Devin Lloyd. That is a great shout where the Giants are concerned.
Yep. Well, I think the kid's a great player. I mean, there's no question he's a great player. And, and sometimes I think if you're a UK listener or you don't follow college football real close, for the University of Utah to win a Pac-12 championship, and Utah's got a great program, and they have for a long time. you're talking about you're you're outdoing Oregon, USC, UCLA, Arizona State, Stanford. I mean, you're talking about that is good football. And for the University of Utah to win a Pac-12 championship, and like you say, take an Ohio State team that was elite and battle them like they battled them in the Rose Bowl. There's a lot of reasons I like this kid, a lot of them, on and off the field. So whoever gets him is going to get a great player.
Yeah, and this is, and I heard you and Michael talking before I came on about, the day three and round three, round four, and the amount of quality players that are still going to be available in that range, just because of, we see things like the quarterback situation really impacting the pecking order in the NFL draft. So yeah, so there's going to be multiple players that you come out of this NFL draft process and go, X team got a steal with X player.
No question. Hey, listen, great job with the linebackers. Who you got for us next week?
I'm just trying to think what we've got left. I think we're saving wide receivers right. Saving wide receivers right till the very end. Let's go with the edge class next week.
Good. When I looked at the first round, I said half the teams in the first round need an edge player. Now, differing degrees of urgency, but half of that's the NFL today. You got to have pass rushers, and you got to have two of them. You can't just have one. So, great job, Ollie. We'll see you back. Putting the ruler on the edge.
We will. I'm looking forward to it.
Ollie, thanks so much for your time, man. And Pro Football Network, PFN 365 on Twitter. Oliver Hodgkinson on Twitter as well. Check it out. Big 2 weeks ahead. I can't wait to annoy you at 3 a.m. and draft night, Ollie.
I'll be awake. I'll get up at 8 o'clock on the Thursday morning, and I'll still be awake at 3 p.m. on the Sunday afternoon. So yeah, hit me up whenever you need.
Nice ones are here. Chat soon. All the best, Ollie.
See you next week.
Thanks, man. I hear people's draft in 2 weeks. That was a really good listen, Jeff. Linebacker, really good.
But he does a great job. I'm it's not just, there's a lot of guys out there that, there's a thing we call scout speak, right? And the little slogans that they use, and and they throw those words around, but they don't really know what they're talking about. They just heard they heard the term. But when I talk to Ollie, Ollie watches film. That's the thing that he doesn't watch a highlight tape. He watches the whole game, and that's how you really can evaluate people.
Very enjoyable conversation. Definitely, I would say the best out there, at the minute in terms of the UK, like covering the draft in that detail all year round as well. So check out Ollie on Twitter. We'll link up his Twitter account. Jeff, we have a couple of things to wrap up before we round off tonight. Over 2,000 people have watched this show when Chelsea are playing in the Champions League. You should be very proud, man. And well done to Villarreal for beating Bayern Munich if you're watching live. Look, first off, this My Hawaii segment, do you want to explain this week? Because I'm not going to lie to you, Jeff. Jeff got a new camera, folks, and a new phone. And the audio in this one, I hope it works, but it's a wee bit like, oh my God. So do you want to just explain it first off, Jeff, just in case?
Yeah, this is it's the legend of the Naha Stone. Now, this is a huge stone that was transported by canoe from Kauai, which is all the way at the other end of the Hawaiian chain, down here to the Big Island, and it was used as a authentication or what?
Yeah.
If you were a child of a chief, you would authenticate your bloodline. They would put the baby on the stone, and if the baby did not cry, he was considered legit. If the baby fussed or cried, then he was sent to, they didn't banish him to the, they just hanai'd him to another family. And then
it's a bit like the NFL draft, Jeff.
Yeah, well, and then also, like your story in England with the sword in in the stone, it was said that whoever can lift the Naha stone will unite the 9 Hawaiian Islands, right? And King Kamehameha, at 14 years old, lifted this. I mean, it's monstrous. And he lifted this stone. Now, the crazy thing about that legend is that when Kamehameha became the king of the island of Hawaii, he set out and years later conquered all of the islands and unified them under his rule. And so it is a very powerful piece of history, and it sits outside the public library in Hilo.
Here we go. Here it is.
Hey, aloha, and welcome to My Hawaii. We are at the Hilo Public Library. We brought the van and parked, and I wanted to show you, this is what's known as the Naha stone. Now, this stone has incredible mana or cultural significance to Hawaiians. This stone was brought here from the west side of Kauai, which is almost at the other end of the Hawaiian chain, and it was brought here by double-hulled canoe. And the story of the stone is that Ali'i children, when they were placed on the stone, if they did not cry, then that was significant of their chiefly status. And the legend was that at some point someone would be able to lift the stone, and that person would go on and unify the Hawaiian Islands, the 9 islands. And Kamehameha the Great, at 14 years old, lifted this stone. Now you can see how gigantic this stone is. It's volcanic rock. And Kamehameha at 14 lifted this stone, and then went on, as history would tell us, and unified the entire Hawaiian chain into one island nation, Hawaii. And so the Na'a stone has a significant place in Hawaiian history.
Jeff, very interesting. And I have to say now, there's a Wi-Fi zone in that library, it says there. So if you are struggling with the Wi-Fi, Jeff, you've no excuses. Get to that public library, my friend. Final segment tonight. Your inside the game segment in Sky. What is it? Talk to us about it before we put it up.
Well, when we were watching the Packers beat the Rams a couple years ago, the Packers offensive line did an amazing job of handling Aaron Donald. And there were some things that they did, physically, but there were some things that they did from a schematic standpoint to make sure that they could account for Donald on every play. And the Rams linebackers were playing so deep at that time that it was almost unfair. And if you remember that game, Aaron Donald did not play very well. And, a lot of that credit needs to go to the Packer offensive line. And we showed you how they nullified one of the greatest players to ever play defense in the NFL.
Here is the final segment of tonight's show.
Leonard Fournette has resurrected his career in Tampa Bay, but here's the reason this play worked. Mike Pettin likes to play what we call light on defense. So everything about run defense is all about gap cancellation. And you can see when they bring in Haig, the extra offensive lineman, they create another gap. So there are 8 gaps that the Packers have to defend, and they don't have enough people. So what you see is this tackle's here, this tackle's here. Now this backer has to jump over to the A-gap, leaving the back with Sean Gary on the backside to have to play 2 gaps. Now watch as he jumps underneath to get into the B gap, and you're going to see Tristan Wirfs, that young player that Baldy talked about. This tackle is outstanding. He just takes Gary and buries him. Now, right here, Jair Alexander, you have got to get the outside hip. Tackle the outside hip, not the inside. If you take the outside hip, you got a chance. Bad tackling and 1 gap shy.
Well, I'm
looking like a young spring chicken, Jeff.
I apologize. It was the Tampa Bay run game, against the Packers. So I thought I had sent you the Packers offensive line, but hey,
it was good.
It's late in Ireland. You're yawning on the show. You're killing me.
Here, I have to say, I do have to jump. However, I really enjoyed that talk about linebackers, and the People's Draft is a mere 2 weeks away. There's rumors you're going to Vegas, maybe put everything
Well,
on red.
about me being in Vegas, but more importantly, the People's Draft is on. So if you want to be a participant in the People's Draft, you want to call your team's first round draft pick, you better hook up with Mike and let us know. Hit us on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm gonna put more information out around like Easter Sunday, Easter Monday time when people are off work, to get them involved. We'll do that during the week. That week, if you're celebrating, happy Easter. Enjoy the weekend, Jeff, in Hawaii. I have to bounce. We'll chat to you soon, man. Mahalo. Thanks for
All
everyone
right.
that's putting comments. Enjoyed it. Until next week, man. Thanks a million.
Thank you, everybody.